The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of anticipation as Judge Morton took his seat, his gaze locking onto the quiet teenager standing before him. The boy, Ethan Walker, had barely spoken since entering the room, his hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie, his messy brown hair falling over his face. His expression was unreadable. Not nervous, not afraid, just indifferent. The contrast between the judge's imposing presence and the unshaken demeanor of the teenager created a charged tension that rippled through the crowd. Judge Morton, known for his no-nonsense attitude and sharp tongue, let out a scoff as he leaned forward, peering down at Ethan like he was nothing more than a waste of space. "Well, well, well," he sneered, his voice laced with condescension. "What do we have here? A young man too afraid to speak? Or maybe you don't even understand what's going on?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom, a few spectators smirking at the judge's biting words. But Ethan remained still, his expression unmoving. He didn't flinch, didn't shift his weight, didn't even blink. He just stood there, his posture relaxed, as if he were completely unaffected by the ridicule aimed at him. The judge smirked, tapping his gavel lightly against the wooden bench. "Let me guess," he continued, tilting his head. "You're one of those kids who think they're smarter than everyone else, huh? Let me tell you something, son. Kids like you end up nowhere. You're wasting everyone's time. Do you even have a brain in that head of yours, or is it just empty space?" More chuckles echoed through the room, but then, in an instant, the atmosphere shifted. Ethan slowly lifted his head, his deep brown eyes locking onto the judge's with a calm intensity that silenced the laughter almost immediately. And then he spoke, his voice steady, clear, and completely unwavering. "Actually, Your Honor," Ethan said, his tone almost casual, "if you're done mocking me, I'd like to correct the mistake in your ruling before an innocent man goes to prison." The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Morton's smirk vanished instantly, his face turning a shade paler. The attorneys at the prosecution and defense tables turned their heads so fast that one of them nearly knocked over his stack of files. Whispers spread through the audience like wildfire, and even the bailiff, who had been standing idly by the door, straightened in alert interest. Ethan didn't break eye contact with the judge. He didn't waver, didn't stammer. He was as calm as ever, as if he'd just pointed out a typo in a school report, instead of challenging the authority of one of the most feared judges in the district. Judge Morton leaned back in his chair, clearing his throat as he attempted to regain his composure. "Excuse me," he said, though his voice lacked the smugness it had held just moments before. Ethan remained unfazed. "The ruling," he repeated. "You're about to sentence an innocent man, Daniel Grayson, to prison for a crime he didn't commit. But the evidence you based your ruling on was tampered with. There was a mistake, a big one." A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man in a crisp navy suit, let out a scoff, crossing his arms. "And what makes you think a 16-year-old kid knows more than the legal professionals who worked on this case?" he asked, his tone dripping with amusement. Ethan turned his gaze to the prosecutor, his expression neutral. "Because they missed something," he replied simply. "Something that proves Daniel Grayson wasn't at the scene of the crime when it happened." The murmurs in the courtroom turned to full-on whispers, spectators leaning forward in their seats, eager to hear what the boy had to say. Judge Morton exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple in frustration. "And just what exactly do you think we missed, Mr. Walker?" Ethan took a slow breath before speaking. "The case against Daniel Grayson is based on security footage from a bank robbery," he began. "The prosecution used a timestamp from the video to place him at the scene, claiming he entered the bank at 9:42 a.m., but that footage was altered." The courtroom erupted into gasps, and even Judge Morton's expression faltered. "That's ridiculous," the prosecutor shot back, shaking his head. "The footage was presented in court, examined thoroughly. Are you telling me our forensic analysts missed something that a teenager somehow found?" "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "The original file was compressed when it was submitted as evidence. When that happens, metadata is altered. I ran a forensic analysis on the publicly available copy of the video and found inconsistencies." Judge Morton narrowed his eyes. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Ethan's voice remained steady. The lighting in the footage, the angles of the shadows, they don't match the time of day the video claims to be from. The sun was supposed to be coming from the east at 9:42 a.m., but in the video, it's positioned as if it were almost noon. Someone altered the timestamp. More whispers spread throughout the room, growing louder with each passing second. The judge sat back, his fingers tapping against the wood of his bench in thought. "Officer," he said, turning to one of the court officials, "contact the bank. Request the original security footage immediately." The prosecutor stiffened. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We're seriously going to entertain the accusations of some kid." The judge shot him a sharp look. "You were just boasting about the strength of your evidence. If you're so confident in it, you have nothing to worry about." The prosecutor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Minutes later, a court official returned, carrying a laptop. He was slightly out of breath, his face pale. "Your Honor," he said, swallowing thickly, "we received a live copy of the bank's original security footage." Judge Morton leaned forward. "Play it." The official plugged the laptop into the court's display system, and the black and white video flickered onto the large screen for everyone to see. It showed the interior of the bank, customers moving about, tellers assisting people. Then, at exactly 9:42 a.m., the doors opened and a man stepped inside. But it wasn't Daniel Grayson. Gasps filled the courtroom. Lisa Walker, Ethan's mother, covered her mouth with her hands in shock. The prosecutor's face went pale, his confidence crumbling. Judge Morton stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath. Ethan tilted his head. "Told you the timestamp was fake." Silence filled the courtroom as everyone processed what had just happened. Judge Morton exhaled slowly, then turned to the prosecutor, his voice dangerously calm. "I assume you have an explanation for this." The prosecutor stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Judge Morton slammed his gavel down. "This court will immediately review the case of Daniel Grayson." He turned to the officers beside Ethan. "And take those handcuffs off this boy." The officers hesitated before unclicking the cuffs around Ethan's wrists. He rubbed at the red marks on his skin, then glanced at his mother, who was still staring at him like she didn't recognize him. Judge Morton exhaled, shaking his head. "Son," he said, "I don't know whether to scold you for hacking into court records or offer you a job." Ethan smirked. "I'm not looking for a job, just didn't want to see an innocent man go to prison." The courtroom was forever changed that day, and Ethan Walker had just rewritten the rules. Ethan Walker sat in the back of his high school classroom, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping against his notebook. The other students around him chatted loudly, exchanging jokes and gossip, but Ethan barely registered the noise. He was different, always had been. While others spent their free time on social media or hanging out, Ethan's world revolved around logic puzzles, hacking challenges, and deciphering complex algorithms. His mother, Lisa Walker, worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, and with his father long gone, Ethan had learned early on that if he wanted a future, he had to carve it out himself. One evening, as he scrolled through legal case files online, an unusual but frequent pastime of his, he stumbled upon a case that didn't sit right. A man named Daniel Grayson was being charged with armed robbery, but something about the evidence felt off. Ethan had always been good at spotting inconsistencies, and as he delved deeper, he saw it. A small but critical mistake in the prosecution's argument. The time steps on the surveillance footage didn't match up with the natural lighting conditions for that time of day. It was a detail so minuscule that no one else had thought to check, but to Ethan it stood out like a flashing red warning sign. Excitement and fear mingled in his chest as he realized what this meant. An innocent man was about to go to prison based on faulty evidence. He had to do something, but who would listen to a 16-year-old high school student? He tried contacting journalists, lawyers, even the public defender's office, but no one took him seriously. Desperate, he decided to take a risk. Using his advanced hacking skills, he accessed the court's restricted database, combing through every file related to the case. It wasn't just the timestamp that was wrong. The entire case against Grayson had been manipulated. Someone had deliberately altered the records to ensure a conviction. When he finally convinced his mother to take him to the courthouse, she was skeptical. "Ethan, this is crazy," she had said, exhausted after another long shift. "You're just a kid. How can you be so sure?" "Because the numbers don't lie, Mum. I have proof." Reluctantly, she had driven him there, never imagining the chaos that would unfold. As Ethan stood in the courtroom before the infamous Judge Morton, a man known for his ruthless attitude toward young offenders, he felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Morton was dismissive, his tone dripping with condescension. A young man too afraid to speak? Or just too stupid to understand what's happening? Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Ethan, however, remained unfazed. When the judge finally stopped taunting him, Ethan raised his head and with calm determination said, "Actually, Your Honor, if you're done mocking me, I'd like to correct the mistake in your ruling before an innocent man goes to prison." The room fell silent. The judge's smug expression faded as Ethan began explaining the discrepancies in the case, detailing how the timestamp had been altered and how the evidence had been manipulated. For the first time, Judge Morton appeared uncertain. Before Ethan could finish, however, the courtroom doors burst open. 2 officers stormed in, their hands on their weapons. "Step away from the bench, now!" one of them barked. Ethan's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected this. "This kid hacked into the court's database," another officer announced. "We have reason to believe he's been accessing classified files illegally." Gasps erupted around the room. His mother's face turned white with shock. Judge Morton's disbelief quickly turned into rage. "You mean to tell me this boy hacked into my courtroom's records?" Lisa Walker jumped to her feet. "My son isn't a criminal. He was trying to help." The officers ignored her, slapping cold steel cuffs around Ethan's wrists. The courtroom was in chaos, but Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "Your Honor, if you'll just let me explain." "Silence!" the judge roared. Ethan had 2 choices: deny everything and hope they let him go, or admit the truth and risk everything. He chose the latter. "Yes, I accessed the files," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But not to cause harm. I found an error. If you send Daniel Grayson to prison, you'll be punishing an innocent man." For a moment, Judge Morton just stared at him. Then, with a deep breath, he turned to the officers. "Get me the original footage from the bank. Now." Minutes later, a court official rushed back with a fresh copy of the unaltered security video. The moment they played it, the truth was undeniable. The timestamp had been altered, and more shockingly, the man in the footage wasn't even Daniel Grayson. The courtroom erupted again. The prosecutor turned pale. Judge Morton, for once, was speechless. "Well, I'll be damned," the judge muttered under his breath. He turned to the officer still holding Ethan in cuffs. "Get those off him, now!" As the cuffs clicked open, Ethan rubbed his wrists. His mother rushed to his side, relief flooding her face. Judge Morton exhaled sharply. "I will personally see to it that Daniel Grayson's case is reviewed immediately. As for you, young man, I don't know whether to scold you for hacking into government records or offer you a job." A small chuckle rippled through the audience, but before Ethan could respond, the courtroom doors burst open again. This time, a man in a black suit entered, his face unreadable. He strode straight to Judge Morton and whispered something in his ear. The judge's expression changed instantly. His jaw tightened. His grip on the bench turned white-knuckled. He turned back to Ethan, his eyes now filled with something different. Concern. "Young man," he said carefully, "I need you to come with us, right now." Ethan frowned. "Why?" The man in the black suit, who introduced himself as Agent Carter, stepped forward. "Because it turns out you weren't the only one looking at that case." Ethan's stomach dropped. The way the agent spoke sent a chill down his spine. Something was wrong, something big. Before he could even react, 2 more officers stepped forward. This time, they weren't just here for a misunderstanding. They were here for something much, much worse. Lisa Walker's voice wavered. "You can't take him. He didn't do anything wrong." Agent Carter looked at her with something almost like sympathy. "Ma'am, I promise you he's not in trouble, but he's in danger, and if you want to keep him safe, he needs to come with us. Now." Ethan swallowed hard. His mind worked fast. Judge Morton wasn't mocking him anymore. The officers weren't treating him like a punk kid. The agent wasn't dragging him away in cuffs. He was being careful. This wasn't just about Daniel Grayson anymore. Ethan had stumbled onto something bigger, something powerful, something dangerous. He met his mother's terrified gaze and gave her a small nod. "Mom, it's okay, I'll be fine." She shook her head, her breath shaky. "I don't understand. Why is this happening?" Ethan turned back to Agent Carter. "Yeah, why is this happening?" Agent Carter exhaled. "Because, kid, the case you just exposed, it wasn't just a mistake, it was a cover-up. And you just put yourself right in the middle of it." The courtroom was thick with anticipation, the air charged with an unspoken tension as all eyes rested on Ethan Walker. Just days ago he had been an unnoticed high school student, spending his time buried in books and hacking into systems for the thrill of understanding how they worked. Now, he stood at the center of a legal maelstrom, accused of cybercrimes and facing a federal conspiracy that reached deep into the government. Ethan's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm, his posture relaxed. The judge glared down at him, his gavel resting heavily in his grip. "Mr. Walker," Judge Morton said, his voice laced with irritation, "you stand accused of hacking into classified government files. What do you have to say for yourself?" The courtroom was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The prosecution had painted Ethan as a reckless hacker, a criminal who had jeopardized national security. But Ethan knew the truth. He had uncovered a conspiracy so deep that those in power were now scrambling to silence him. Taking a deep breath, he met the judge's gaze head-on. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "I didn't hack into those files for personal gain or to cause harm. I did it to expose a cover-up that would have sent an innocent man to prison. If doing the right thing makes me a criminal, then so be it. But I have evidence that proves what I'm saying." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, scrutinizing him. "You have evidence?" "Yes, sir. If you allow me to present it, you'll see that this entire case isn't about me. It's about those trying to hide the truth." Judge Morton hesitated. This was highly irregular, but something in Ethan's unwavering expression made him nod. "Proceed." Ethan pulled out a USB drive from his pocket, his fingers steady as he handed it to a court officer. This drive contains original, unaltered files, proving that the case against Daniel Grayson was falsified. It also shows financial transactions linked to a high-ranking senator, money funneled through offshore accounts to fund something much bigger than just a rigged trial. The prosecution immediately objected, but the judge silenced them with a raised hand. "Play the files." The screens in the courtroom flickered to life, displaying a series of transactions, emails, and security footage that contradicted the official evidence presented against Grayson. Gasps echoed throughout the room as the truth unraveled. The senator's name appeared multiple times, his direct involvement undeniable. The weight of the revelations crashed down like a hammer, sending shockwaves through the audience. The prosecutor, who had been so confident just moments ago, paled. "Your Honor, this information is damning," Judge Morton interrupted. He turned to Ethan, his stern demeanor softening slightly. "Mr. Walker, do you realize what you've done?" Ethan straightened. "I stopped an innocent man from being wrongfully imprisoned, and I exposed corruption that would have otherwise stayed hidden." The judge nodded slowly. "While your methods were unorthodox and frankly illegal, your intentions and the results cannot be ignored." He turned to the prosecutor. "I believe this warrants an immediate investigation into the individuals named in these files. As for Mr. Walker, I will consider his actions as an exceptional circumstance. Charges will not be pressed at this time." Relief flooded through Ethan, but he knew it wasn't over. The courtroom was still abuzz, and the danger he had uncovered wasn't going away. He glanced at Carter, the federal agent who had pulled him from the chaos of the conspiracy, and saw the warning in his eyes. As the judge dismissed the case and court officials scrambled to process the implications of the new evidence, Carter approached him. "Kid, you did good, but this isn't over. The people behind this aren't just going to let it slide. You exposed them, and now you're a target." Ethan exhaled. "I figured as much. What now?" Carter sighed. "You lay low, and you let me handle the fallout. You're smart, but these people? They don't play fair. You might have won this round, but the game is far from over." Ethan nodded, the weight of what he had done settling on his shoulders. He had fought for the truth and won, but at what cost? The senator's network was still out there, powerful and vindictive. As he stepped out of the courthouse, the sun casting long shadows on the pavement, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Ethan Walker had changed everything, and now he had to be ready for what came next. Ethan Walker never expected to be at the center of a government conspiracy. Just a few weeks ago, he was a quiet teenager in high school, more interested in hacking for fun and analyzing case files than in making friends. But now, he was running for his life, caught in a battle against forces far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. It all started when Ethan discovered inconsistencies in the case of Daniel Grayson, a man accused of a crime he didn't commit. What seemed like a simple error in evidence turned into something much bigger. A cover-up involving high-ranking government officials and millions of dollars laundered through secret accounts. Ethan's innocent curiosity led him to expose something dangerous, something that made him a target. After barely escaping an assassination attempt at the courthouse, Ethan found himself under the protection of Carter, a seasoned federal agent who seemed to be the only person willing to help. Carter knew they were up against a well-connected network of corrupt politicians and operatives who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. They couldn't go to the authorities. Too many were compromised. Their only option was to take matters into their own hands. Hiding out in a remote safe house, Ethan spent hours combing through encrypted files, searching for the missing link that would bring everything crashing down. It wasn't enough to expose the corruption. They needed undeniable proof that would force the system to act. The key, Ethan realized, lay in the transactions, specifically in a mid-level government contractor named Jacob Finch. Finch wasn't at the top, but he was close enough to the operation to have vital information. Finch was scared. His financial records showed erratic behavior, assets being moved, offshore accounts being liquidated. He was trying to disappear. Ethan knew that if they could get to Finch before their enemies did, they might have a chance to uncover the full truth. Carter arranged a meeting with Finch, using contacts within his old network. They met in an abandoned warehouse, away from surveillance. Finch was jittery, his eyes darting around the room. He knew he was in danger. "You don't understand," Finch whispered. "They don't just make people disappear. They erase them." Ethan leaned forward. "We can protect you, but you need to tell us everything." Finch hesitated before pulling out a flash drive. "This has everything. Account numbers, wire transfers, memos. It proves the senator is behind everything." Just as Finch handed Ethan the drive, a gunshot rang out. Finch collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Carter pulled Ethan down as more shots echoed through the warehouse. They had been followed. Carter returned fire while Ethan scrambled to secure the flash drive. Bullets ricocheted off the metal walls as they made their way toward the exit. Carter took down 2 attackers, but more were closing in. They barely made it to their car before tires screeched and more armed men arrived. "Drive!" Carter shouted. Ethan slammed the accelerator, weaving through the city streets as their pursuers gave chase. Gunfire shattered the back window. Carter leaned out, returning fire, taking out one of the vehicles behind them. But the enemy had more resources, more men, and they weren't giving up. Just when it seemed like they had no way out, Ethan spotted an alleyway barely wide enough for their car. "Hold on!" he yelled, swerving into the narrow passage. Their pursuers weren't as lucky. One of the black SUVs tried to follow but got stuck, blocking the others. It bought them just enough time to escape. Back at their new hideout, Ethan plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The data was overwhelming. Hundreds of transactions, secret meetings, and names of officials involved in the corruption. And then, one file caught his eye. It was labeled Priority 1. Ethan clicked on it, and his breath caught. The document contained direct communications between the senator and key operatives, discussing not only the cover-up, but also future plans. This wasn't just about money laundering. It was about something much bigger. "They're planning something," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something huge." Carter read over his shoulder. "A coordinated operation. Military assets being moved. Classified locations." He frowned. "This isn't just corruption, this is treason." Ethan felt the weight of what they had uncovered. If they didn't act fast, the country could be facing a crisis far worse than financial fraud. But the senator and his people wouldn't go down without a fight. Carter made a call. "We're not handling this alone. We need allies." Within hours, trusted contacts within the intelligence community were briefed. Some were hesitant, fearing for their careers, but the evidence was undeniable. A small team was assembled, ready to confront the senator at a public event where he wouldn't be able to hide behind his power. The gala was the perfect setting. Dozens of influential people, reporters and cameras. If they exposed the senator there, he wouldn't be able to spin the story. Ethan and Carter infiltrated the event, blending into the crowd. When the moment was right, Ethan accessed the event's media system, broadcasting the incriminating files onto every screen in the ballroom. Gasps filled the room as the evidence played out in real time. The senator's face turned from arrogance to fury. Security moved in, but it was too late. FBI agents, now armed with undeniable proof, stormed the room. The senator tried to run, but Carter was faster. He grabbed him by the arm. Game over. As the senator was led away in handcuffs, Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It was over. The corruption, the cover-up. It was all exposed. Days later, Ethan sat outside, watching the sunrise. Carter joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You did good, kid." Ethan smirked. "Not bad for a teenager, huh?" Carter chuckled. "Not bad at all." Ethan knew his life would never be the same. He had stepped into a world of danger and deception, but he had also made a difference, and for the first time, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere. As the sun rose over the horizon, Ethan realized one thing. This was just the beginning. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Ethan Walker's shoulders as he sat in the dimly lit safe house, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of his laptop and the occasional rustle of papers being shuffled by Carter, the seasoned federal agent who had become his reluctant ally. The discovery they had made was bigger than anything Ethan could have ever imagined. A conspiracy that ran deep within the government, involving money laundering, corruption, and a senator who was willing to do anything to keep his secrets buried. Ethan had spent the last few hours analyzing the data he had uncovered. The more he dug, the clearer the picture became. The stolen funds weren't just sitting in offshore accounts. They were being funneled into private security firms, used to fund operations that were far from legal. This wasn't just corruption. It was a calculated effort to build an infrastructure of power that operated outside the law. Carter stood behind Ethan, his arms crossed as he watched the screen. "You sure about this, kid?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Ethan nodded. "There's no doubt. Richardson isn't just stealing money, he's using it to buy influence, to pay off the right people, and to ensure that no one questions his actions." He turned to Carter, his expression serious. "We have to expose him before he realizes we have this information." Carter exhaled sharply. "That's easier said than done. He's already got the media spinning the narrative that you're a cybercriminal. If we go public the wrong way, it could backfire." Ethan knew Carter was right. He had seen how easily the media could be manipulated. If they didn't handle this carefully, they could end up as fugitives rather than heroes. But he also knew that time was running out. That Richardson wouldn't wait for them to make their move. He would strike first if given the chance. "We need leverage," Ethan said finally. "Something that forces his hand, something that makes it impossible for him to silence us." Carter raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you have in mind?" Ethan's mind was already working through possibilities. "We need someone on the inside, someone who's been part of this operation but wants out. If we can find a weak link, we can use their testimony to bring Richardson down." Carter rubbed his chin. "That's a long shot, kid. People involved in this kind of thing don't just switch sides." Ethan smirked. "Maybe not willingly, but fear has a way of changing loyalties." He turned back to his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. He scanned through financial transactions, looking for anomalies. That's when he found it. A series of withdrawals made by a man named Jacob Finch. Finch was a mid-level government contractor with access to the financial accounts used in the laundering scheme. More importantly, his recent transactions suggested he was trying to disappear. "Found him," Ethan murmured. Carter leaned in. "Who?" "Jacob Finch. He's trying to cover his tracks, moving money, cutting ties. He's scared, which means he knows something." Carter studied the screen. If he knows what Richardson's up to, we need to get to him before Richardson does. Ethan nodded. Exactly. They wasted no time. Within the hour they were on the move, tracking Finch to a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The neon sign flickered as Carter pulled the car into the parking lot. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached the door to Finch's room. Carter knocked once. "Jacob Finch, we need to talk." There was silence for a moment, then the sound of shuffling inside. The door cracked open, revealing a disheveled man with wary eyes. "Who are you?" Finch demanded. Carter flashed his badge. "We're here to help you, but you need to let us in." Finch hesitated before stepping aside. Once inside, Ethan wasted no time. "We know you've been involved with Richardson's operation. We also know you're trying to get out. If you help us bring him down, we can protect you." Finch ran a hand through his hair. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he muttered. "Richardson isn't just another corrupt politician. He has people in places you wouldn't believe. If I talk, I'm dead." Carter leaned forward. "You're already a target. Your best chance is with us." Finch's eyes darted between them, assessing his options. Then he sighed. "Fine, but if I do this, you make sure I don't end up in a ditch somewhere." Carter nodded. "You have my word." Ethan pulled out his laptop. "Tell us everything." For the next hour, Finch spilled everything he knew. Richardson's operation was more than just money laundering. He was funding paramilitary groups, orchestrating political blackmail, and even bribing law enforcement to look the other way. It was worse than Ethan had imagined. When Finch finished, Ethan leaned back, taking it all in. "This is it," he said. "We have what we need to bring him down." Carter stood. "Then let's move before Richardson realizes we're onto him." But before they could leave, the room was suddenly filled with the sound of screeching tires. Ethan's stomach dropped. Carter grabbed his gun. "We've been found." A second later, the door burst open and armed men stormed in. Finch dove for cover as bullets tore through the walls. Ethan barely had time to react before Carter shoved him behind an overturned table. "Stay down," Carter ordered, returning fire. Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't win in a shootout. They had to escape. He glanced toward the back window. Their only way out. "Carter, we need to move," Ethan shouted. Carter fired one last shot before grabbing Finch by the arm. "Go!" Ethan threw open the window, climbing through as bullets whizzed past. Carter followed, dragging Finch behind him. They hit the ground running, disappearing into the night. As they sped away in Carter's car, Ethan turned to Finch. "Do you still think talking was a bad idea?" Finch let out a shaky breath. "I think I just signed my death warrant." Ethan shook his head. "No, you just saved your life. Now let's make sure Richardson doesn't have a future." Ethan Walker had spent most of his life in the background, a quiet observer in a world that rarely noticed him. He had learned early on that people didn't appreciate being corrected, didn't like it when someone younger and less experienced pointed out the flaws in their logic. So he had learned to keep to himself, burying his brilliance in books and computer screens, content to let others believe he was just another unremarkable teenager. But now, as he sat in a dimly lit safe house with Agent Carter pacing beside him, Ethan realized there was no going back to that life. The events of the past few days had shattered any illusion of normalcy. He had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, narrowly escaped an assassination attempt, and publicly exposed a powerful senator's corruption. Now, his face was on every news channel, branded as both a whistleblower and a fugitive. "Are you listening, kid?" Carter's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. The agent was standing across from him, arms crossed, watching him carefully. Ethan nodded, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, I heard you, but I don't think hiding is the answer." Carter let out a sharp breath, clearly frustrated. "We're not hiding. We're regrouping. There's a difference." Ethan shook his head. "No, there's not. Every second we sit here, they're building a case against me. They're turning me into a villain. If we wait too long, the truth won't matter anymore." Carter studied him for a long moment, then leaned against the wall. "All right, genius. What's your plan?" Ethan swallowed. He had been thinking about this non-stop since they had escaped the courthouse. There was only one move left that would put an end to this before it spiraled completely out of control. "We need to make this bigger than just us," he said. "We need to expose everything, live, in real time. No filters, no media spin. Just the truth." Carter raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you plan on doing that?" Ethan turned his laptop toward him, his fingers flying over the keys. "By using the one thing they can't control." He clicked a final button, and suddenly multiple live streaming platforms flickered to life on the screen. "We're going to go straight to the people." Carter let out a low whistle. "You do realize this paints an even bigger target on your back, right?" Ethan smirked, though his hands trembled slightly. "I think we passed that point a long time ago." They spent the next hour setting up the stream, ensuring that once it started, it would be nearly impossible to shut down. Ethan rerouted the signal through multiple encrypted servers, bouncing it across continents. Even if the government tried to shut it down, it would be too late by then. As the final seconds ticked down before the stream went live, Carter placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Whatever happens next, you've already done more than most people ever will." Ethan nodded, his throat dry. Then he pressed start. The screen flickered, and suddenly Ethan's face was live to millions. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Ethan Walker, and I have something to tell you." He started from the beginning, recounting how he had stumbled upon the case of Daniel Grayson, an innocent man framed for a crime he didn't commit. He explained how he had uncovered evidence of tampered surveillance footage, how he had been arrested for hacking into government files, and how, in the process, he had exposed something far bigger than a single wrongful conviction. The live chat exploded with reactions, thousands of comments flying in every second. Some called him a hero, others called him reckless, but most importantly, people were listening. Then, Ethan dropped the real bombshell. He pulled up the financial records, the leaked emails, the hidden transactions that traced back to powerful figures within the government. He laid it all out, piece by piece, until the entire world could see exactly what was happening behind closed doors. By the time he finished, the stream had reached over 10 million viewers. Carter exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, kid, you just changed the game." But before Ethan could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside sent a chill down his spine. "They're here," Carter muttered, drawing his gun. Ethan's stomach twisted. They had known this would happen. He had prepared for it, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Carter turned to him. "Listen to me. No matter what happens, you don't stop fighting. You hear me?" Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. Then the door burst open. Agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Carter moved fast, taking down 2 men before they even had a chance to react, but there were too many of them. Ethan was grabbed, yanked backward as someone forced him to the ground. He struggled, but the weight against his back was too much. His hands were wrenched behind him, cold metal snapping around his wrists. He barely had time to see Carter before the agent was tackled to the ground as well. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Ethan Walker, you are under arrest for unauthorized access to classified government systems, conspiracy and treason." Ethan gritted his teeth. "I exposed the truth." The man smirked. "That's not how they'll see it." As he was dragged toward the waiting black SUVs, Ethan turned his head toward Carter, who, despite being restrained, gave him a single nod. And in that moment, Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. Ethan Walker had always been the quiet kid, the one who sat in the back of the class, unnoticed, absorbed in his world of logic puzzles, code, and algorithms. He wasn't a troublemaker, he didn't crave attention. But when he discovered a critical flaw in a high-professorial court case, his life took a drastic turn. What started as a simple curiosity, analyzing legal records for inconsistencies, had spiraled into something far more dangerous. Assault. The revelation that Daniel Grayson had been framed wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate cover-up orchestrated by powerful people. Exposing the truth meant Ethan had placed himself in the crosshairs of a dangerous conspiracy. With federal agents now aware of his skills and his intrusion into classified systems, he was no longer just an ordinary teenager. He was a target. As the jet soared towards Washington, D.C., Ethan sat in the cabin, his laptop resting on his knees. Carter, the federal agent who had taken him under his wing, sat across from him, his sharp eyes monitoring every move Ethan made. The cabin hummed with tension. The files Ethan had uncovered detailed a vast network of corruption, money laundering, illegal dealings, and connections to government officials at the highest levels. They had evidence, but now they needed a way to expose it without getting themselves killed. "We need to get to Richardson before he finds out we're coming," Carter said, breaking the silence. Senator Richardson. The name alone carried weight. He was one of the most influential politicians in the country, a man whose reach extended deep into the justice system. He wasn't just involved in the conspiracy, he was at the center of it. Ethan's fingers danced across the keyboard. "He's going to a gala tonight. High security, lots of press. It's our best shot." Carter nodded. "It's a good play. Public setting means he can't just have us silenced, but it also means we need to be careful. One wrong move, and we disappear." Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't a game. It wasn't just hacking into files from the safety of his bedroom. This was real, and the consequences were life or death. But he had come too far to back out now. The gala was a lavish affair, held in one of DC's most prestigious hotels. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, the scent of expensive cologne and champagne filling the air. Politicians, business moguls, and high-ranking officials mingled, oblivious to the storm brewing in the background. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of the tuxedo Carter had managed to secure for him. He felt out of place, like an imposter in a world of power and privilege, but tonight he wasn't here to blend in, he was here to expose the truth. Carter, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, leaned in. "We stick to the plan. You upload the files, I distract Richardson, and we let the evidence do the talking." Ethan nodded. He had already set up a secure transmission that, with one click, would send the data to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. All they needed was the right moment. As they moved through the crowd, Ethan spotted Richardson laughing among a group of senators and corporate executives. He looked untouchable, his arrogance on full display. Ethan clenched his fists, not for long. Carter approached Richardson first, shaking his hand, engaging him in conversation. It was all a distraction, giving Ethan time to slip away, find a secure location, and hit send. He moved toward a corner of the room, pulling out his phone, logging into his encrypted system. Then, everything went wrong. A firm hand clamped onto his shoulder. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned, coming face to face with a man in black, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't a security guard. This was someone sent specifically to deal with him. Before he could react, the man pulled him through a side door, into a dimly lit hallway. Another man joined them, blocking the exit. "You've been causing a lot of problems," the second man said, his voice cold. "People don't like problems." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had been careless. They had known he was coming. The first man pulled out a phone, dialing a number. "We have him," he said simply. Ethan's pulse pounded. He couldn't let this happen. If they took him now, the truth would never come out. He had to act. Fast. He shifted his weight, calculating his options. Then, in a split second, he made his move. Using every ounce of adrenaline, he slammed his elbow into the first man's gut, spinning around and kicking the second in the knee. They stumbled, giving him just enough time to bolt for the door. He sprinted back into the gala, heart hammering, searching for Carter, but before he could reach him, a voice rang out through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance." Senator Richardson's voice boomed over the speakers. Ethan froze. The senator stood on stage, a smug smile on his face, eyes locked on Ethan. Security guards were already closing in. "I see we have an uninvited guest," Richardson continued. "A boy who thinks he knows things he shouldn't." The crowd murmured, confused. Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't let Richardson control the narrative. Taking a deep breath, he raised his phone, tapped the screen. Every screen in the ballroom flickered to life. The documents, the videos, the financial transactions. All of it filled the room, exposing Richardson's corruption in real time. Gasps filled the air. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The senator's expression faltered for the first time. Carter appeared at Ethan's side. "You really don't do subtle, do you?" Ethan smirked. not when the truth is at stake. Before Richardson could react, FBI agents stormed the room. The senator barely had time to protest before he was placed in handcuffs. As they led him away, he locked eyes with Ethan, a slow, menacing smile forming. "This isn't over, kid." Ethan's heart pounded, but he didn't waver. "Yes, it is." Hours later, as the sun rose over Washington, Ethan stood outside the Capitol building, the weight of the night settling in. Carter clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, kid." Ethan exhaled. "So what happens now?" "The system takes it from here," Carter said. "And you? You get your life back." Ethan glanced down at his phone, the breaking news alert still flooding in. He had done it. He had exposed the truth. But as he stared into the morning light, he knew this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. Ethan Walker had never expected his life to take such a drastic turn. One moment he was just a quiet, observant teenager, and the next he was caught in a high-stakes game of corruption, power, and survival. Exposing Senator Richardson had been only the beginning. While the public outrage following the revelation led to the senator's arrest, Ethan knew that bringing down one man was not enough. The web of deceit stretched far beyond a single individual. Now, with the government scrambling to manage the fallout and powerful figures desperate to bury the truth, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The morning after the senator's arrest, Ethan sat in a dimly lit safe house, staring at the flickering screen of his laptop. His hands hovered over the keyboard, scrolling through the files he had uncovered. The evidence had brought down Richardson, but there were still names left unexposed. He had mere hours before the authorities would either try to recruit him or silence him for good. Carter, the federal agent who had become his reluctant ally, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him closely. "You did it, kid," Carter said, his voice laced with both admiration and caution. "You tore a hole in their operation. But don't think for a second that they're done with you." Ethan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "I know. Richardson was just a puppet. There's someone pulling the strings behind the scenes, and if we don't find them, they'll rebuild everything we just tore down." Carter sighed, pushing off the wall and pacing the room. "You're right. But we need to be careful. Whoever's behind this, they have the resources to make people disappear." He paused, then fixed Ethan with a serious stare. "You sure you want to keep going? You could walk away now, try to live a normal life." Ethan met his gaze, determination burning in his eyes. "I've come too far to stop now." Carter smirked, shaking his head. "Figured you'd say that." Just then, the burner phone on the table buzzed. Ethan and Carter exchanged glances before Carter picked it up. A deep, unfamiliar voice came through the speaker. "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are. If you want to survive the night, you need to leave the safe house. Now." The line went dead. Ethan's heart pounded. That can't be good. Carter immediately grabbed a duffel bag filled with emergency supplies. "We're leaving, now." Within minutes, they were in an unmarked black sedan, speeding down an empty stretch of road. The air was thick with tension. Ethan's mind raced. Who had called, and how did they know where he was? A few miles outside the city, Carter turned onto a secluded road leading into an abandoned warehouse district. He pulled the car into a darkened alley, killed the engine, and turned to Ethan. "We need to regroup. No electronics, no signals. Whoever called us, if they wanted us dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation. That means they want something." Ethan nodded, his fingers already working through the possibilities. "They might have information, or they might be trying to set us up." "We're about to find out," Carter said grimly. Minutes later, a lone figure stepped out of the shadows. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in a dark trench coat, her expression unreadable. She approached cautiously, stopping a few feet from the car. "Ethan Walker, Carter." "You've made quite a mess." Carter tensed. "And you are?" The woman pulled a folder from her coat and tossed it onto the hood of the car. "Someone who wants the same thing you do. The truth." Ethan opened the folder and scanned the documents. Names, transactions, a list of individuals connected to Richardson's operation. Senior officials, corporate executives, even intelligence operatives. At the bottom of the list was a name that made Ethan's breath catch. Secretary Alan Monroe. "The Secretary of Defense," Carter muttered, looking over Ethan's shoulder. You're telling me he's the mastermind? The woman nodded. Richardson was a useful pawn, but Monroe is the architect. The missing funds weren't just about laundering money. They were about financing something bigger. Ethan's fingers clenched around the papers. What is he planning? The woman's expression darkened. A private intelligence network, off the books, untraceable, with full autonomy from the government. Carter swore under his breath. That's treason. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind already piecing together a plan. Then we expose him, just like we did with Richardson. The woman hesitated. It won't be that easy. Monroe is more powerful, more protected. If you go after him, you'll be making enemies in every corner of Washington. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we do it smart. For the next few hours, they devised their strategy. Monroe had covered his tracks well, but Ethan's digital expertise could trace his financial movements. If they could prove the connection between Monroe and the stolen funds, they could force the government's hand. But this time, they needed insurance. They needed the public on their side before Monroe could silence them. The plan was set. Ethan would hack into Monroe's secure communications and extract the final pieces of evidence. Meanwhile, Carter would arrange for the information to be leaked to international watchdogs and media outlets. They had one shot. If they failed, there would be no second chances. That night, Ethan sat alone in a safe house, his laptop glowing in the darkness. His fingers moved with precision, bypassing encrypted firewalls, weaving through layers of security. Every keystroke brought him closer to the truth. And then he found it. A single email, marked classified. A direct communication from Monroe to a group of high-level operatives. Ethan's pulse quickened as he read the message. Proceed with Phase 2. We move forward at dawn. No loose ends. He exhaled sharply. Monroe wasn't just covering his tracks, he was accelerating his plans. There was no more time to wait. He compiled the files, encrypted them, and hit send. The world would know the truth. The next morning, news outlets exploded with the revelations. Monroe's private intelligence network, the siphoned funds, the backdoor dealings. Protests erupted. Congressional hearings were announced. Compression was announced. The Secretary of Defense was placed under investigation. Ethan watched it all unfold from the safe house, exhaustion washing over him. Carter placed a hand on his shoulder. You did it, kid. Ethan nodded, but he knew it wasn't over. The fight for truth never really ended, but for now he had won. And that was enough. Ethan Walker sat in the back of the dimly lit safe house, his laptop screen casting a faint glow on his face. The events of the past few weeks had turned his world upside down. He had gone from being an unnoticed high school student to uncovering a government conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. Now, as he stared at the rapidly scrolling lines of code, he knew that the battle was far from over. Ever since exposing Senator Richardson's corruption, Ethan had been on the run. Despite the senator's arrest, powerful figures were still working behind the scenes to silence him. The federal agents protecting him had done their best, but Ethan knew that no amount of security would keep him safe if he didn't take matters into his own hands. He had to disappear, not just physically, but digitally as well. Carter, the grizzled federal agent who had become an unlikely ally, paced the room, his eyes flicking toward Ethan every few minutes. "You sure this is the only way, kid?" he asked, arms crossed. Ethan nodded without looking up. "If I don't erase my digital footprint completely, they'll keep hunting me. I need to become a ghost." Carter sighed. "It's a hell of a thing, what you did, exposing corruption at that level. It makes people nervous." He rubbed his temples. "I've seen people disappear before, but usually it's not by choice." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew what Carter meant. Powerful people didn't just let things go. "I don't have a choice," Ethan admitted. "I have to finish what I started." As he typed, Ethan methodically erased every trace of his existence. His school records, medical history, bank accounts. He wiped them all clean. Every digital trace of Ethan Walker was disappearing into the void. His laptop hummed softly, the final steps of the process unfolding in front of him. Carter walked over and placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're going to have to go somewhere new, build a new identity. I have contacts who can help." Ethan exhaled slowly. I've been thinking about that. He pulled up a file on the screen and turned the laptop toward Carter. Before I go off the grid, I need to do one last thing. Carter narrowed his eyes at the screen. What am I looking at? A failsafe, Ethan said. If anything happens to me, if I disappear for real, this file will go live to every major news outlet, every government watchdog, and every journalist who still cares about the truth. Carter let out a low whistle. Smart. Insurance policy. Ethan nodded. I won't let them bury this. The truth needs to stay alive. Carter gave a small smirk. You're a hell of a kid, you know that? Ethan shrugged. I didn't ask for any of this. The room fell into silence as Ethan finished his work. He pulled a USB drive from the laptop and handed it to Carter. This has everything. If I don't check in after a month, send it out. Carter took the drive and tucked it into his jacket. You got my word? Ethan stood and stretched, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him. He had done everything he could. Now it was time to disappear. Hours later, under the cover of darkness, Ethan boarded a bus heading west. He wore a new identity, a new name, and carried only a single backpack filled with essentials. As the city lights faded behind him, he thought about his mother, about Carter, about the people he had left behind. He had done what he set out to do, but at a great cost. Staring out the window at the endless highway, Ethan wondered what the future held. Would he ever be able to stop running? Would justice truly prevail? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He had changed the game, and now the world would never be the same. Somewhere, in a high-rise office overlooking Washington, D.C., a group of powerful men watched the news as Senator Richardson's empire crumbled. One of them, a shadowy figure known only as Holloway, turned to his colleagues. "The boy is still out there," he said, voice cold and calculating. Another man, older with graying hair, nodded. "We underestimated him once. We won't make that mistake again." Holloway's lips curled into a thin smile. "Find him." Far away, Ethan Walker stepped off the bus in a small town, blending into the crowd. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready. The fight wasn't over, but for now, he had bought himself time. And for someone like Ethan, time was all he needed. As we grow older, we come to realize that life is not always fair, and the truth is often buried beneath layers of deception, power, and corruption. The story of Ethan Walker reminds us of an essential truth. Standing up for what is right is never easy, but it is always worth it. One of the most significant lessons from Ethan's journey is the power of truth. In a world where misinformation and manipulation are widespread, it takes courage to seek and uphold the truth. Ethan, a young boy, found himself in a battle against a corrupt system that sought to silence him. Despite the overwhelming forces against him, he did not back down. This reminds us that no matter our age, we must always stand for honesty and integrity. Whether in our personal relationships, communities, or society, the truth is a foundation that must be protected at all costs. Another valuable lesson is the importance of perseverance. Ethan could have given up the moment he realized the dangers he was facing. Many people, when confronted with adversity, choose to walk away rather than fight an uphill battle. However, history and experience teach us that change only happens when people persist. For older adults who have witnessed decades of societal changes, this message is especially relevant. Whether in matters of justice, family, or personal growth, perseverance remains a key ingredient in overcoming obstacles. Additionally, Ethan's story highlights the significance of using knowledge for good. He was not just an intelligent boy. He used his intelligence to make a difference. In life, we all have skills, wisdom, and experiences that can be used to help others. Seniors in particular possess a wealth of knowledge that can be passed down to younger generations. Whether it's through mentoring, storytelling, or offering guidance, sharing wisdom is one of the most impactful ways to create a lasting legacy. Finally, this story teaches us that doing the right thing often comes with risks. Ethan faced danger because he chose to expose corruption, but his bravery led to justice. Life has shown us that sometimes we must take difficult stands, even when it is uncomfortable. Whether it's defending a friend, speaking up against wrongdoing, or supporting those in need. Doing the right thing is always a choice worth making. At any age, we can still fight for justice, seek the truth, and use our experiences to inspire others. The world may be uncertain, but integrity, wisdom, and perseverance never lose their value.